My name is Anthony Koval. For 10 years, I built a time machine in my garage. Everyone thought I was crazy. Maybe they were right. Then one night, it finally worked. A tunnel of light opened in front of me, and the last thing I remember was one number flashing on the screen. 1776. I woke up in the middle of Boston. The air smelled like smoke, wood, and the ocean. Horses moved through the streets. British soldiers stood on the corners with muskets in their hands. And everywhere I walked, people were angry. They kept arguing about taxes. The British government kept taking money from the colonies, but the people living here had no voice in Parliament, no representation, no real rights. That's why everyone kept repeating the same sentence. No taxation without representation. At first, it sounded like politics, but the longer I stayed there, the more I realized this wasn't just about taxes anymore. People here were starting to hate the idea of being controlled by a king thousands of miles away. And Boston was becoming the center of something dangerous. And then, everything around me started shaking again. The streets blurred, the voices disappeared. That same tunnel of light pulled me back in. A new year flashed in front of my eyes. When I opened my eyes again, Boston felt different, colder, angrier. People weren't just complaining anymore. They were furious. British ships stood in the harbor loaded with tea, and everywhere I went, people whispered about one thing: the tea. That's when I met her, a young woman named Abigail. Her father worked at the docks. Her brother disappeared after protesting British soldiers. She looked at me and said something I'll never forget. They taxed our paper, our glass, our food, and now even our tea. I asked her why tea mattered so much, and she almost laughed. It's not about tea anymore. It's about control. That night, she took me down to the harbor. Men moved through the darkness in silence. Some covered their faces, some dressed like Native Americans. Nobody was drunk, nobody was joking. This wasn't chaos, this was organized anger. Then suddenly, crash! Boxes of British tea hit the water, one after another. The entire harbor smelled like tea leaves and salt water. People stood there watching in complete silence, because everyone understood something terrifying. After this moment, there was no going back. The next morning, Boston exploded with fear. British officials were furious. Soldiers flooded the streets. The port was shut down. Businesses collapsed. Families lost work. And Abigail looked at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "They wanted to punish Boston. But instead, they taught the colonies how to hate the empire." She looked at the ships in the harbor, the British soldiers, and quietly whispered, "One day, we will be free." The next night, it happened again. The ground beneath me started shaking. Voices echoed through the streets. The harbor disappeared, and that tunnel of light opened in front of me once more. I tried to fight it this time, but the light pulled me in anyway. Then, another year appeared in front of my eyes. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in Boston anymore. I was standing on a muddy road between colonies. Cold wind, rain, men on horses carrying letters through the night. Something was changing, fast. The anger was no longer just in Boston. Now all the colonies were talking to each other. Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, South Carolina. Everyone was watching what Britain did to Boston. That's when I met the Walker family. A small family living outside Philadelphia. The father repaired wagons, the mother baked bread for travelers, and their oldest son, Thomas, wanted to join the resistance. But his father hated the idea. "We are British. We were born British. We don't want war." At dinner that night, everyone argued. Thomas slammed his fist on the table. "If they can destroy Boston, they can destroy all of us." But his father looked terrified, not angry, terrified. "You think war is some heroic story? You think the British won't hang people for this?" That's when I finally understood something important. In 1774, most colonists still didn't want independence. They still believed the king might listen. They still hoped things could be fixed. Nobody was saying, "Let's create a new country." Not yet. They just wanted rights, fair treatment, a voice. But every month, Britain pushed harder. More soldiers, more punishment, more control. And slowly, fear was turning into unity. A few days later, I watched men arrive from different colonies. They gathered inside a building in Philadelphia. For the first time, the colonies were truly starting to unite. Not as 13 separate places, but as something larger. Thomas looked at me that night and quietly said, "If we don't stand together now, there may not be a future for any of us." And somewhere deep inside, I think everyone already knew the truth. The road to independence had already begun, even if nobody was brave enough to say the word out loud yet. Suddenly, that sound came back again. The ground started shaking, the air became heavy, and the tunnel of light instantly pulled me inside. A new year flashed in front of my eyes, 1775. When I opened my eyes, it was still dark. Cold morning air, fog covering the road, and in the distance, the sound of drums. British soldiers were moving fast, hundreds of them, muskets, bayonets, everything looked like an empire preparing to crush someone. I found myself near a small town, Lexington. People were waking up in the middle of the night. Some loaded muskets, some hurried to say goodbye to their families, and some just stood there silently, staring into the darkness. It felt like everyone already knew. Something was about to change forever. That's when I met a man named Samuel, an old musket in his hands, dirty clothes, exhausted eyes. He didn't look like a soldier. He looked like a farmer. I asked him, "You're really going to fight the British Army?" He stayed silent for a few seconds, then quietly answered, "I don't want war. Nobody here wants war, but the British don't see us as people anymore. To them, we're just colonies. And if we back down now, they'll control our children the same way they want to control us." And that's when I realized something terrifying. For years, people still hoped things could be fixed, that the king would finally listen, that this could all end peacefully. But now, that hope was starting to die. Then everything happened fast. British soldiers marched onto the field. The colonists stood across from them. Just a few dozen men, farmers, ordinary people, not an army. They looked nervous. Some were shaking. Nobody wanted to fire first. And suddenly, a shot. One single shot. Nobody even understood where it came from. But seconds later, hell exploded. Gunpowder filled the air, screaming, musket fire, men collapsing onto the ground. Samuel grabbed my arm and shouted, "Run!" But it was already too late. The war had begun. Later that day, the British marched toward Concord. They wanted to seize colonial weapons. They wanted to crush the resistance before it could become a real army. But now everything had changed. Colonists started gathering from everywhere. Farmers, workers, hunters. They fired from behind trees, from rooftops, from stone walls. The British had won wars all over the world. But here, they suddenly realized something dangerous. These people were no longer afraid to die. By sunset, the road back to Boston was covered in smoke and blood. British soldiers were retreating under constant gunfire. And Samuel, breathing heavily, quietly said to me, "There's no turning back now." I thought the worst had already happened, but later that night, I heard a new name, George Washington. And the way people whispered it felt like something even bigger was coming, much bigger than a fight between colonies. A real war.